Taxi!
Where to, mate?
Hello, mate. 55 Tufton Street, please.
55 Tufton Street, SW1. Yep, I know it well. Hop in, sir. This is A Nation of Taxpayers, a weekly podcast from the Taxpayers Alliance.
Welcome to another episode of A Nation of Taxpayers. It is the podcast from the Taxpayers Alliance. I'm your host, Duncan Barkes. Alongside me this week, we have Callum McGoldrick from the Taxpayers Alliance. Second appearance on the podcast. Just remind people listening, Callum, as to your role here.
I'm a researcher.
You're a researcher at the TPA, and our guest this week is a man who I think we'll describe as the Alan Bates of HS2, Michael Gross. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming in. Now, we're going to talk about HS2 and we're going to link it to something that is out today, which is a new research paper from the TPA, the Taxpayers Alliance, called Big Spending Projects Gone Wrong. So what I'm going to do, Callum, is just get you to explain initially what the paper's about. Then we'll talk to Michael about his experience of HS2, because there's a lot of insight and there's a lot of information that we need to share to listeners of our podcast. So, Callum, the paper's out today. In a nutshell, what's it about?
So every year, the Infrastructure and Projects Authority lists every major project currently being conducted by the government. They have 227 for the 2023-24 financial year. Of these, they've managed to list 163 of them as amber, meaning that delivery is likely to be completed but with significant delays, and a further 27 will not be completed or are running so badly that success is, as it was envisioned at the start, is just not possible anymore, meaning that 83% of projects in the UK are running with significant issues.
Right, so let's strip this down for the man or the woman in the street. This is taxpayers' money. Yeah?
Yes, yeah.
Taxpayers' money, a load of infrastructure projects, most of which, from what you said, are running vastly over budget and over time.
Yes, that's it. So further on in the paper, we look at the four of the biggest cost burdens, four of the biggest projects: the Lower Thames Crossing, Houses of Parliament restoration, the programme to bring the NHS fully digital, and a scheme called the Rail Passenger Services, which was sort of this vague, nebulous term used to encompass 11 separate smaller projects, all sort of brought under one big umbrella.
It's a problem in this country, isn't it? When we talk about vast projects or infrastructure, we seem to be appalling at it. I mean, I'm a little bit older than you. I can go back to 2010, when it was discovered at the end of the Labour government, the NHS computer system cost 12.7 billion quid. This was the idea of electronic patient records. Only about 160 health organisations out of 9,000 used it, and it was classed as a white elephant. Who picks up the tab? It's us. It's the taxpayer. What is your thinking and reasoning as to why we are so bad at this?
Well, the National Infrastructure Commission also released a report not so long ago that outlined 4 key areas of failure: a lack of clear strategic direction, a problem with client and sponsorship management, inefficient consenting and compliance, and then a constrained supply chain.
Right.
I think from doing all of the reading behind all of it, the biggest problem was the lack of clear strategic direction. When projects are started, they just don't know how to actually deliver them. Right. They don't know how they'll end up, and they hope to sort of just find their way.
So we have a lack of talent.
Yes, it seems so.
And it seems to me, from some research I've done in the past, an over-reliance on consultants who seem to be the only people who actually benefit out of this.
Well, the Lower Thames Crossing has already spent, I think, 300 million on planning and consultation. Wow. That's more than Norway spent on building the world's longest road tunnel.
This research paper, Big Spending Projects Gone Wrong, is on the TPA website. People can have a look at it. Let's bring in Michael Gross, the Alan Bates of HS2. I'm guessing, Michael, everything that Callum's just said won't be a massive surprise to you.
No, it's not a massive surprise because they all have the same thing in common. They have civil servants at the top of the command chain, civil servants who have no qualifications, who are only interested in their own promotions, and who habitually lie and deceive Parliament about where they are on any project. And unfortunately, as I have at some expense and at great effort determined, are subject to corruption from the supply chain in almost every project that you've mentioned.
Let's talk about your HS2 experience, because I was doing some reading last night, and it'd be a lot easier. I mean, I could explain it, but I think it's better to come from the horse's mouth, so to speak. I mean, you've become an activist, a campaigner about exposing how HS2 has been run as a project, how it's vastly over budget. How did you first get involved?
Right. It's relatively simple. I was the largest CPO claimant in history, not just on HS2, but on anything else, because I had site assembled an office park in front of the station, which consisted of 40 Melton Street, Grant Thornton Building, the Podium, and one Evershaw Street, all in front of Euston Station, all assembled not as everybody else looked at this project from a development point of view, because I knew that development depended on Network Rail and the government, and they have proved themselves to be so inept that I wasn't prepared to make an economic investment decision based on them. It was purely as a cash cow. And I never wanted to sell Euston because we bought it when rents were £30 a foot, and we'd breached the £80 a foot mark within 10 years. So it was the future of the next 4 generations of my family at the least. But I was CPO'd. That's after volunteering to be a joint development partner, and I'll come to that in a minute. And I noticed straight away there was something untoward about the way I was being dealt with.
Let me just ask you a question on behalf of our listener. CPO, compulsory purchase order.
Yes.
Again, in layman's terms, is it as simple as they just come along and go, we're having that, and you've got to accept this amount of money?
It's not quite as simple as that, but it actually amounts to that. The CPO is based on 2 elements. The first is the existing investment value of the building, in which there wasn't much dispute. And the second is on the development value. Now, it is verging on the impossible to prove the development value of a station that's not been built, and which conspicuously the Department of Transport and their creature HS2 Limited haven't got to first base about building and capable of doing it, and they were never capable of doing it.
Why is there the lack of capability? Because it goes back to what Callum was saying a few moments ago. Is it simply a lack of talent? I mean, you've talked about civil servants earlier. Is it a lack of experience, knowledge? Where do we point the finger of blame?
Well, I think you've got to talk about Euston as a unique situation, which has only really been done on scale once. Euston is a badly needed redevelopment because the station has been over capacity for about 50 years already, is regularly closed for health and safety reasons. But the problem with Euston is that a large part of it is built over live tracks that need to continue to run. And there's only one real example of this, as opposed to building stations from scratch like the Hong Kong fast train station and other fast train stations. And that is Hudson Yards in America. And I teamed up with the related group, and we were the only really credible bidder for the redevelopment Euston, quite apart from my ownership and CPO.
You've used the term fraud and fraudulent a couple of times so far. So just let's spend a few more minutes on just developing that a little bit. Why do you believe it was fraudulent?
Well, the whole project was fraudulent and from day one. And there are 2 elements to that. First of all, if you're principal secretary of the Department of Transport, as Sir Philip Ruttman was, and you have 0 personal qualifications for this job, and your department has a unbroken history of failure, major infrastructure projects. What do you do when you're asked to implement a scheme of a nature that's never been done in the UK before? And the obvious answer was there were 8 countries, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, Saudi Arabia, Japan and China, who had systems up and running. So the cheapest and only really obvious way to do this was to have a competitive tender. All you had to do was say, I want to connect Euston Station with points A, B, C and D elsewhere in the country. I want Y capacity. Now, you people who've done it, who know something about it, you tell us how much it's going to cost, how much government subsidies are needed, and the word subsidy has never been mentioned in official terms, either in terms of the capital cost and, more importantly, in terms of the future running costs. What railway isn't subsidised? And typically railways, 80% of the total cost throughout the life of the railway is subsidies, not capital costs, and they've never mentioned it. So it was never viable. And instead, what did Philip Ruttman do? He formed his own little company, HS2 Limited, and the results are as you can see them. The blind leading the blind.
Callum, let's just pick up on something that Michael said there, because he's absolutely bang on the money, right? If you're going to do a project like this, you'd look at where it's happened around the world elsewhere, you'd look at success stories, you talk to those people, you might nick their ideas, it doesn't matter, but surely you would do that. From what Michael's saying, it wasn't the case, they just cracked on through arrogance or whatever. Does that surprise you at all?
Not really. It's something that, like I said, the National Infrastructure Commission outlined it in their report. They said the major cause of failure for all projects in the UK is that there's a lack of strategic direction. They start without knowing where they're going, and they sort of just hope that somewhere along the way something will fall into place that means magically everything will start working. And you think, it's not really a surprise then that the cost of HS2 from its initial estimate has tripled.
Well, I must intervene on a number of grounds. First of all, they knew in the first year, in 2013, leading up to Sir David Higgins' report in 2014, that they couldn't do it for the cost that they told Parliament. And there was a mechanism in place under the development agreement where they should have stopped. Every year should be a review. And there is a letter from McLaughlin to Osborne saying we can't meet the review points, so we'll ignore them. That's the first point. You mentioned the National Infrastructure Committee. They were told very early on about this, and they chose, like the National Audit Office, like the Controller General, like every arm of government, to be complicit in this disaster and in this fraud. National Audit Office produced a report in 2018 which said everything in the garden was rosy. Now they've produced one saying quite the opposite. Well, if we were able to tell them, and they didn't want to hear, they actually refused to take evidence, as of course the Public Accounts Committee and the Transport Committee refused to take this evidence 5-6 years ago. All these people could have stopped it at 8 billion, 10 billion. They didn't want to stop it. And that's the key reason I use the word fraud, is someone give me an answer why people who knew it had gone wrong wanted to keep pumping money into it.
Well, let's talk about the political aspect of this, because I think we're not too far away from this, because it seems to me, and either of you call me out if you think I've got this wrong, but there was so much political capital at risk and front, if you like, that no one was prepared anywhere along the journey to go, hang on a second, lads, ladies, this is overrunning, we need to revisit, etc., etc. No one's prepared to do that because they would look politically stupid. Is that a fair comment?
No, they weren't stupid. They knew what they're doing.
Let's just revisit this idea, because we're right to focus on HS2, because we have you in our studio this week. But the broader picture of larger infrastructure projects in this country. We know about the Lower Thames Crossing, for example. I call it the second one. That's taken, well, Callum, how long has it taken to get to where it's at now?
It was first suggested in the 80s, but
Yeah.
the actual plan for this one started in 2009.
Yeah.
And they've only just got planning approval.
And there have been so many appeals along the way, so many special interest groups will just go, you can't do that because it might upset the newts. I mean, I'm being a little bit flippant, but I mean, there have been various
No, you're
hold-ups.
not being driven. They don't upset the bats.
The
For
bats?
150 million.
There was a bat
pounds.
barn, wasn't there, that had to be constructed.
No, I've got to tell you something, that this country has no idea how to achieve anything at every level, political, development and public level. Now, if you want the third runway in Heathrow matches the Thames crossing almost exactly
Yeah.
in the same way. But Euston is interesting, you see. I remember going to see the leader of Camden Council, and she said, "Oh, we don't want any retail. We want affordable housing." I said, "Madam, how are you going to contribute to a hugely expensive station with overstation development for the loss-making element and not the highly profitable element?" Oh, she said, "I've got to do an impact statement on Tottenham Court Road and Camden High Street." Well, I said, "That's easy. Tottenham Court Road is largely a hi-fi and furniture store, and Camden High Street mainly sells drugs. So I promise you we don't want to sell drugs. And if you don't want us to sell hi-fi and furniture, we won't. What people want is to be able to do their immediate shopping needs on their way home."
Yeah.
And you're going to have 100 million people going through there. That's what you need to build. So if you're ever going to build Euston, you have to make it a development area, and you have to tell Camden, and you have to tell all the residents groups that this is a station, it's not a public football. And if you want to redevelop something on a social basis, you've got the biggest slum in central London called Somerstown right next door. You can do it on your own land.
In terms of our listener this week and your HS2 experience, dare I say it, your crusade, where are you currently at?
Well, they deny everything. Everything is a denial. We managed to get Bernadette Kelly to resign because she had to admit we were putting pressure on Clifton Brown, chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. So she had to admit, along with Mark Wilde, the CEO of HS2, who apparently is trying to bail out now and go and be head of GB Rail, which means effectively that the government are likely to close HS2 completely after this election. So it'll either happen in her cuts in June, because I can't see a Labour Prime Minister and a Labour Chancellor destroying the welfare state completely and keeping this Ponzi scheme.
But it's
going.
interesting you say that, because if you were to go and start running GB Rail, effectively what you're doing is you're rewarding failure, aren't you? So the people who don't deliver or are incapable of delivering anything, some might say, they just end up being shuffled along elsewhere and the same mistakes are repeated.
Absolutely, that's the pattern of government.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that they sign... HS2 have thousands of non-disclosure agreements. Why would a public body have non-disclosure? And these people there's an after-sale service where they get other jobs. This is the failed nature of our establishment these days.
And for you, ultimately, what would be a good result?
What would be a good result? Well, you need to close it down, because Phase 1, even from Old Oak Common to Curzon Street, will cost about 300 million before subsidies. Nobody has ever mentioned the funding costs. No subsidies, no funding costs. It's just one lie after another. So that needs to be closed down. But if you really want what the result is, I think Charles III should follow Charles I and II, prorogue Parliament and install experts.
It's interesting, actually, that, Callum, isn't it? That you've got politicians with either very little experience or no experience in the area that they're responsible for, who oversee budgets going into billions, who ultimately have the say-so over some massive infrastructure projects. Michael's making the point that actually, it shouldn't be down to the politicians. What we need is actually the experts who know how to build things and let them have the power. Is that right?
It would certainly probably be a more preferable situation to where we are. I think there's a worry that they just continue to outsource responsibility to quangos, who then have no direct minister over them. They can essentially do whatever they like in large policy areas while costing just as much. Like for the house building example, our research on Monday showed that Homes England have over 100 people earning over 100 grand a year. The most common thing that they do is block housing applications and prevent housing being built. And you think, how on earth can a quango with so many staff earning such astronomical figures be so catastrophically bad at what they do?
Elsewhere in the document that's out today, big spending projects gone wrong. Anything else that we need to highlight?
We outlined some key recommendations. One of them, and one of the most major ones, is more accountability. If you're in charge of a big project,
but you've got Michael laughing here, so we'll pick up on that in a second.
Any accountability would be a start. But if you're in charge of a major project and it starts going wrong, you shouldn't be given 2, 3, 4 years left in the job. You should be thrown out on your rear a bit quicker.
And that's interesting, actually, because the accountability, some might say, is, well, that could be a select committee in Parliament or the relevant minister. But it goes back to Michael's point, if that minister's got no expertise in that area, they're just going to nod along to whatever they're told, right?
Yeah, that was our other thing. We wanted sort of harder milestones to say, if you go over budget by a certain amount, if you go past a certain amount of delays, then either throw it back to a vote in Parliament or say that it's scrapped automatically, to say that we're not continuing white elephants, we're not continuing a gravy train for sort of everyone involved in the project when it's clearly not going to be delivered on what the ministers and what the planning approval was granted on in the first place.
And in terms of transparency, I mean, this is a major piece of work the TPA has done, and you have a track record of digging around and finding stuff. But from a transparency point of view, is it quite easy to get hold of this information about delays and the waste?
It took a couple of months to write. So we found that the sort of the Infrastructure and Projects Authority will list the major projects and it will give it a sort of chance of success. But once we would have the buzzwords, so they would use the specific names of projects, the specific terms that they're using for phases of projects, we could then send freedom of information requests to whoever was responsible and ask them for data on that, which is the bulk of what the paper's built on.
And Michael, I think I know the answer to this question, but when it comes to transparency, where do things need to improve?
Well, they don't need to improve. They don't exist currently. I mean, look, we have a parliamentary oversight system, allegedly. So we go to Dame Meg Hillier 5 years ago and we say, they're lying, they're cheating, the figures don't add up. And she will not accept the evidence. She won't present the evidence. Now, this is Labour opposition member. This is a silver bullet to take down the government. Why is she refusing to do it? Can somebody please give me an honest reason why a woman in that position would do it? And you can see how she and Bernadette Kelly orchestrated a session. So on one hand, she appeared to look tough, but on the other hand, she never got a straight answer from Bernadette Kelly. And once they, of course, are in this position, Parliament closes ranks. I mean, we wrote to the Speaker of the House of Commons, right? And he replied, I can't intervene, it's a political matter. I said, it's nothing to do with politics. Both sides are at it. It's to do with the integrity of the House. Nusrat Ghani goes in 2019 and says trains are running in 26 and it's only 56 million for the entire network. We knew that this was absolute nonsense. She's claiming she didn't know. She's now saying that she only said what she was told. And Stevenson, the Minister for HS2, is coming up with this wonderful euphemism. Well, if you announce every change in budget, you won't get anywhere. Now, I think the word budget needs to be examined in this context, whether it's the budget for the tunnel, or it's a budget for the airport, or it's budget for National Health Service. A budget is a reasoned, professional, honest estimation of future costs. I can tell you for a fact the budget for HS2 was the pack of lies, the fraudulent misrepresentation to extract money from Parliament. And whenever a member of the government, the civil service or the opposition uses the word budget in connection with HS2, they're talking about the false figures that were used to pass the funding legislation for HS2.
And we must remember, it's not parliamentary money, it's not government money, it's taxpayers' money. We all have a right to know if a budget has been exceeded or is going to be increased. We need to understand why, and the people responsible for actually not being able to keep things within budget. Listen, it's been a fascinating conversation. Michael, a pleasure to have you in the studio. Thank you. Also, Callum, just remind people where they can find out more about the paper.
So yeah, if you go to our website and then research papers, you'll see it at the top of the list there.
You can help us with this podcast, A Nation of Taxpayers. You find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube. Please follow us, please like us, subscribe and share, and it gets our weekly podcast out to a wider audience. Until next time, thank you for listening.